Chapter 2. In the Shivapalganj police station, a man was pleading with the sub-inspector, his hands folded in supplication. Several months have passed while you continually delay matters. Please don't put off charging me any longer. The sub-inspector was half sitting, half reclining on a seat which must once have been medical throne, but now that it was worn out, had been reduced to the status of an armchair. When he heard the request, the sub-inspector raised his hand and said, "You will be charged eventually. What's the hurry? What calamity is descending upon you?" The man sat down on a stool near the armchair and said, "For me it's a calamity. If you charge me, then the trouble will be over." The sub-inspector started swearing under his breath. It soon became clear that what he meant to say was that the amount of the work he had to do was making him thoroughly fed up. There was so much work that he wasn't able to investigate crime, couldn't charge sheet cases, couldn't give evidence in the court. There was so much work that all work had come to standstill. The stool slid towards the armchair. The man said, "Sir, my enemies have begun to say that there is a gambling in Shivapalganj in broad daylight. An anonymous complaint has been sent to the superintendent, and anyway the agreement is that you charge me once a year. This year you are late with the charges. If you file it now, then his complaint also will be done with. It was not only the armchair, everything was medieval. The raised platform of sitting on, the rag of rug lying on it, the pen stand, the pot of dried ink, the dusty register which were turning at the corner, everything looked several centuries old. For this police station, the fountain pen hadn't yet been invented. The only progress made in this direction was that the pen weren't made out of reed. For this police station, the telephone was still a thing of future. By way of weapon, there were some ancient rifles which looked as though they had been used in revolt of 1857. Anyone for everyday use. For the constable had bamboo staffs, but which a poet had written, for crossing rivers the canal, for hitting dogs and animals. There is no more useful thing. For this police station, jeep did not exist. In the place, a horse served as a sort of vehicle. It was loving cared for by 2 or 3 village watchmen, and its ancestors must have performed the same role since the days of Mughal Empire. The common people had great expectations of sub-inspector, the police station's dozen or so constable. If there was a burglary in the village 8 miles away, then in 250 and 300 village which came under the police station, it was believed that one or other of the policemen would certainly witness it. If there was a dacoity at night somewhere 12 miles away, then it was expected that they would get their head of the dacoit. Because of this blind faith, no weapon other than 1 or 2 odd rifles had been given to any village. The fear was that by handing out guns, the uncivilized and savage villagers would learn to use them and set about killing one another. River of blood would flow. As for protection for the dacoit, that was left to the magic performed by sub-inspector and his dozen and so men. In short, the sub-inspector and his men were kept there on the understanding that they were no ordinary mortals, but geniuses worthy of being conjured up by Aladdin's lamp. The British installed them and in 1947 returned to their homeland. Gradually, people began to find out that the sub-inspector and his constables were not genies but men, and sort of men who themselves rubbed their lamps day and night in their hope of forcing a genie to come out. When the managing director of the Gambler Union of Shivapalganj left, the sub-inspector raised his head once and looked around. Everywhere was peace. The lion-clothed constable who had been staining bhang beneath the tamarind tree was now anointing a nearby Shiv Lingam with it. A watchman was grooming the horse hunches. A dacoit sitting in the lockup was loudly reciting prayer to the monkey god Lord Hanuman. Just outside the gate, the constable on duty, no doubt in order to be in position to keep constant watch at night, was asleep propped up against a pillar. The sub-inspector wanted to close his eyes and doze But then just he saw Rupan Babu approaching. He grumbled, you can't even shut your eyes." As Rupan Babu came in, he got up from his chair, and despite the fact that courtesy week had long passed, he courteously shook hand. Rupan Babu sat down and immediately said, "A letter has been received by Ramadin. The dacoity have asked for 500 rupees. It says, on the last night of the dark night, bring 5,000 rupees to the southern hill." The sub-inspector smiled and said, "Really, Sahib, this is too much. In the old days, dacoits used to cross river and mountain to collect money from your home. But now they expect you to leave your home and go and deliver the money to them." Rupan Babu said, "Yes, that's what I'm saying. It's not dacoity, it's just bribery." The sub-inspector continued in the same tone. "Bribery, theft, dacoity, now they have all become the same. It's communism." Rupan Babu said, "Fathers say the same thing." "What does he say?" "The same communism has taken over." They both laughed. Rupan Babu said, "No, I'm not joking. Ramadin really had received this letter. That's why father has sent me here. He says, so what if Ramadin is our opponent? He shouldn't be tormented like this." Rupan Babu narrowed his deep-set eyes and looked at the sub-inspector. The sub-inspector stared back at him and smiled. He said, Don't worry, there will be no dacoity as long as I'm here." Rupan Babu said in the mild tone of voice, "That's I know. The letter is a forgery. Just inquire of your own constable. Perhaps one of them wrote it." "No, that couldn't be. My constables are illiterate. Most can't even sign their own names." Rupan Babu was about to say something more, but the sub-inspector said, "What's the country? What's the hurry? For now, let Ramadin file his complaint. Let him show me the letter." For a while, both were silent. Then a thought occurred to the sub-inspector. "If you were to ask me the truth, I would say it seems that this is bound up with the education department." "How?" "And not just the education department, with your college." Rupan Babu took this remark badly. "You are out to get my college. It appears to me that some boy from your college has sent this letter to Ramadin. What do you think? In your eyes, students are responsible for all crime." Rupan Babu rebuked him. "If someone took poison in front of you and died, you people wouldn't even admit that was suicide. You would say that some student has poisoned him." "You are right, Rupan Babu. If it is necessary, I would even say that I am a follower of Bakhtawar Singh. Perhaps you didn't know that." After this, they started on one topic of conversation for government servants. What government servants used to be like and what they are like now. They touched on the subject of the Bakhtawar Singh. Sub-Inspector Bakhtawar Singh was returning home alone one evening. Two badmash called Jagru and Mangru attacked him in mango grove and beat him up. The story got out, and so Bakhtawar Singh entered a report of the beating at the police station. The next day, the two badmash came and clashed his hand. They said, "Sir, you are our mother and father. If a child get angry and behave badly with his parents, they forgive him." Bakhtawar Singh fulfilled his duty as a parent and forgave them. They fulfilled their final duty and made good arrangement of Bakhtawar Singh in his old age. Bakhtawar Singh fulfilled his duty as a parent and forgave them. They fulfilled their final duty and made good arrangement for Bakhtawar Singh in his old age. The matter was soon settled. But the British police officers under whom Bakhtawar Singh served object to this. "If you cannot conduct a successful investigation into your own case," he said, "what hope have you got with anyone else's? So what if it was dark? If you couldn't identify anybody, what prevent you from suspecting someone?" Then Bakhtawar Singh picked up 3 suspects. They were old enemies of Jagru and Mangru. He prosecuted them. Jagru and Mangru gave evidence on behalf of Bakhtawar Singh, saying that at the time of attack they had both happened to come to the mango grove for a very natural reason. This is to defecate. All 3 were sentenced. Seeing the state of Jagru and Mangru enemies, several boys of the area began coming to Bakhtawar Singh daily with the request, "Oh mother and father, this time please give us the chance to beat you." But Jagru and Mangru were enough to provide him for for him in his old age. He refused to increase his offspring. Rupan Babu laughed for some time. The sub-inspector was pleased that Rupan Babu was happy with just one story. He didn't have to tell a second. His second story would come in useful for entertaining another leader. Controlling his laughter, Rupan Babu said, "So you are a follower of that Baktawar Singh. I was before independence, but now we have to serve the people for the association." Rupan Babu touched his arm and said, "Forgive it. Apart from you and me, there is no one listening." The sub-inspector didn't lose his enthusiasm. "I'm saying that before we get our freedom, I was a follower of Baktawar Singh. Now in these days, I am a follower of your father." Rupan Babu said humbly, "You are most kind. Is my father worthy of such kindness?" He stood up and looked out onto the road. "It seems Ramadan is coming. I'm off. Please look into this dacoity letter properly." Rupan Babu was 18. He was in the 10th year at the local college. He loved to study and especially studying in 10th year. For this reason, he had been studying in it for the last 3 years without passing the annual exam, which would qualify him to move up a class. Rupan Babu was a local leader. His personality refuted the allegation that to be a leader in India, your hair had to turn grey in the sun. His leadership was founded in his view that everyone was equal. The sub-inspector in the police station and the thief in the lockup were one. In the same way, a student who copied an exam and college principal were one. He considered them all pitiable. He did favors of all of them and extracted favors from all of them. He was so respected that no capitalist shopkeeper sold him goods, but made an offering of them, and no exploited horse cart drive took a fare of driving him to the town, but only asked for his blessings. The first and last days of his leadership was local college, where a sign from him, hundreds of students would make a palm tree out of a sesame seed or a mountain out of molehill, and if necessary climb it up. He was thin and scrawny, but no one banded words with him. He was a long-necked, long-limbed lad, in the belief that a popular leader was to be nattily, if outlandishly dressed. He wore a white dhoti and a colourful bush shirt. Round his neck he tied a silk scarf. He kept the loose end of his dhoti on his shoulder. Although he looked like an emaciated calf, he had the presence of a stallion rearing on its hind legs. He was born a leader because his father was also leader. His father's name was Vediji. Chapter 3. The dark bungalow with two big and small rooms had been abandoned by a district board. One side of its thatched roof had been raised on mud walls to make stable. A little away from stables, in tin roof had been erected on a pakka brick wall, and sort of shop had been created. To one side there was a one-room guardhouse of the kind found by railway crossings. To other, under a large banyan tree, was a raised platform resembling a tomb. Near the stable, and modern style building had been constructed on which was written Community Center Shivpalganj. Behind all this lay 3 or 4 acres of barren land which had been broken up and sown with fodder plants. Here and there some had actually grown. All these buildings were collectively called the Changamal Vidyalaya Intermediate College Shivpalganj. Merely on the basis of this building, the students sitting for their intermediate exams would say, "We are more advanced than Tagore's University at Shantiniketan." It may try to recapture tradition and hold its classes in the model of village architecture, but we are the genuine Indian students. We have no idea what electricity is, what tap water is, what a pakka non-mud floor look like, or what is meant by a sanitary fitting. We have even had our Western education in an Indian tradition, and so, behold, today we are still just as close to nature as ever. Even though we have studied so much, we still pee on tree trunk and find it impossible to relieve ourselves in closet spaces. Changamal had been chairman of the district board. With the help of a fake planning proposal He had transferred the board's dark bungalow to the college managing committee at a time when the college had nothing but a managing committee. The condition of the transfer was that the college be named after Changamal. Every part of the college had its own story to tell. The community center had been built with government money taken in the name of the village council, but its house and principal's office and classes even and 11 and 12. The stable had been constructed with volunteer labor, while the tin shed had been removed with the dead of night desert building in military cantonment. The barren land adjoining the college came in useful for agriculture science, and the millet which grew on its here and there came in a useful for the principal's buffalo. There is a shortage of engineers and doctors in India. The reason is that Indians are traditionally poets. Before comprehending anything, they become infatuated by it, had composed poetry. When they look at the huge Bhakra Nangal, then they say, "Oh, to reveal his miracle, behold, God has once again chosen the land of India." When they see a young woman on an operating table, they being reciting romantic verses. Despite this storm of emotion and other similar hindrances, the country had to produce engineers and doctors. They will truly be engineer and doctor when they go to America and England. But some initial work, the take-off stage, is to be done here. That was the kind of work being done by Changamal Vidyalaya Intermediate College. A science class was in progress. Class 9, Master Motiram, who was in a way had passed in BSc exam, was teaching the boys relative density. Outside sheer beauty enveloped the small village. On the road, bullock cart loaded with sugarcane were heading towards the sugar mill. Some half-starved children were running behind, pulling out canes to chew. The drivers, sitting at the front of the carts, were swearing vigorously at the land. The point of fundamental importance in swearing is the volume of voice. So the auth and the counter-auth entered the classroom through the window. I provided background music for the boys who were enjoying the drama and study science. One boy said, "Master Sahib, what is relative density?" The master replied by transferring the term into English. Another boy said, "Master Sahib, now look, you are teaching English instead of science." The master said, "How can you learn bloody science without English?" The boy began to laugh. The reason for their mirth was not the discussion in Hindi or English, but the use of bloody. The master spoke. "There is no need to laugh." The boy were not convinced. They laughed even louder. At this, Master Motiram himself began to laugh with them. They stopped. Master Motiram forgave the boys. He said, "If you don't understand relative density in English, then understand it in Hindi in a different way. Relative mean a comparison with something. Imagine you have opened a flour mill. The next door your neighbor opened another flour mill. You make 500 rupee a month from your mill and your neighbor make 400 rupee from this. So in comparison with him, you made more profit. In scientific language, we can say that your relative profit is greater. Understood?" A boy said, "I understand, Master Sahib, but the whole thing is wrong from the start. No one in this village could make 500 rupees from a flour mill." Master Motiram thumbed up his hand on the table. "Why not? A determined man can do anything." The remark did not dissuade the boy from answering back. "He can't. My uncle's mill work non-stop, but it's difficult to make 200 rupees a month." "Who is your uncle?" Master Motiram wiped out his brows and looked intently at the boy. He asked, "You are not dishonest, Munna? His nephew, are you?" The boy didn't try to conceal his pride. He said in a couldn't care less voice, "So, what if I am?" This honest Manu was an extremely respectable man among Englishmen whose roses have no scent to speak of. There is a saying, "A rose by any other name would smell as sweet." Similarly, by whatever name you call him dishonest, Manu continued contentedly to run his flour mill, to earn his living and be an honorable man. In fact, dishonest Manu didn't earn his name. He had inherited it. In childhood, his father had given him a nickname, Dishonest. Out of love, his mother called him Manu. Now the entire village affectionately called him Dishonest Manu. He had accepted this name with the same ease as we have accepted the name of Acharya for J.V. Kripalani. Pandit for Jawaharlal Nehru, and Mahatma for M.K. Gandhi. Master Motiram stared at dishonest Manu's nephew for a while. Then, drawing breath, he said, "Let it pass." He buried himself in the text that was open in front of him. When he lifted his eyes, he saw the boy had already lifted their eyes and were watching him. "What it is?" he asked. One of the boys said, "If it is settled that you can't earn 500 rupees from the flour mill in a month." "Who say you so?" asked the master side. "I myself have earned 700 rupees a month from the flour mill many times. But thanks to dishonest Manu, everything is being ruined." Dishonest Manu's nephew said politely, "What is there to be sorry about it, master side? It's a business. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. It happens like that when there is a competition." "What competition is there between the dishonest and the honest? What nonsense are you talking?" Master Motiram rebuked him. Why then the college chaprasi was standing in front of him with a message. Reading the message, the master said, "Whoever you seem to be coming in to inspect you, one teacher to every 10 inspector. It's really dreadful, said one of the boys. The master started and looked at the class. "Who spoke?" A boy raised his hand and said, "I did, Master Sahib. I was asking how you work out relative density." Master Motiram continued, "In order to work out relative density, you have to know the weight and volume of an object. After that, you have to know the way of working out the relative density. As far as the way is concerned, there are always two ways, a right way and a wrong way. It's necessary to give you an example to make you understand. Imagine you have set up a flour mill. The mill has fine new machinery. It's shining and it's well greased. The engine is new, the belt is new. You have got everything, but you don't have electricity. So what's the result?" The boys who spoke first said, "You will have to use a diesel engine." Manu uncle did. Master Motiram said, "Manu uncle isn't the only one around here with brain. Who was it who first brought a diesel engine into this village? Does anyone know?" The boy put their hand and chorused, You brought it." The master sahib looked at Munna's nephew with satisfaction and said with contempt, "Did you hear? Dishonest Manu only got the diesel engine when he had one. I had one, but my mill was running before this college was opened. It was at my mill that a full 2 pound of flour was taken from your customer as a donation for the college building. That flour ground in my mill was taken to the town for sale. It was on my mill that the plans for the college building were made." And a manager uncle said, "Moti, you will be called a master in the college, but you will really be the principal. Everything happened on the account of my mill, and now if everyone has a mill, it's dishonest money. My mill means nothing." A boy said, "How did you say you work out relative density?" The master sahib said brusquely, "I'm telling you that." He looked out of the window 3 feet above the sugarcane cart on the road and fixed his glance beyond them on to the horizon. He spoke like the poet of yesterday who wore fixed romantic expression. She was the only machine like her in the whole neighborhood. She was iron, but she sparkled like glass. Suddenly he took straight at the class and said, What did you ask?" The boy repeated his question. But even before that, Master Motiram's attention had drifted off in another direction. The boy picked up their ears and listened. Outside, above the oaths of the sugarcane stealers and the sugarcane protectors, above the sound of principal ticking of the chaprasi, above the savan of the harmonium rising from the music class, a bhag noise suddenly started up. Master Motiram's mill was working. This was its sound, a genuine sound. Above the people's hue and cry over their lack of knowledge and clothing, above the scream of the Reuters, about the argument that over all this. A true leader hears only the voice of his soul and nothing else. In the same way, Master Moti Ram heard only the sound of his mill. He heard nothing else, just bhag, bhag, bhag. He began to run towards the classroom door. What's happened to Master Sahib? The boy asked. The bell hasn't rung yet. The Master Moti Ram said, it sounds as if the machine's working again. Let's see how it's running. He got to the door but suddenly turned back. A pained expression spread across his face as if someone had pinched him hard. He said, read from your textbook. The chapter on relative density is essential. Hesitantly he added, it's important. As he spoke, his face brightened again. Bhag, bhag, bhag. Duty was summoning him into the complex world of karma outside. The Maya of boys and book could not restrain him. He left. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the principal Sahib emerged from his room. Parts of his thin body were covered by khaki shorts and a shirt. He carried a police sergeant's baton pressed under his arm and wore sandals. Although he looked rather sharp and smart, he considered himself much sharper, smarter than even that. Trailing along after him, he always was the college clerk. He was a close friend of Principal Sahib. They both passed close to Master Moti Ram's class. The class was being held in a stable-like building. Even from a distance, it is clear that no master was present. A boy dressed in pajama from the ankle to high was sitting crying on the master's desk. He saw the principal going past and began to cry more loudly. The principal asked, what's going on? Where has the master gone? The boy now stood up and cried. A second boy said, this is Master Moti Ram's class. Then there was no need to say where the Master Sahib had gone. The clerk said, a second-hand machine requires 24-hour supervision. How many times have I told Master Moti Ram to sell this flour mill, but he doesn't understand. I myself was once prepared to give 1,500 rupees for it. The principal Sahib turned the clerk. Let it be. Go and bring my Malaviya from the class over there. The clerk told the boy, go and bring Malaviya from the class over there. Soon a rather good-looking young man could be seen approaching. As soon as he saw him coming, the principal shouted out, Brother Malaviya, look after this class too. Malaviya come up to the principal, stood holding to one of the bamboo poles in the thatch and said, how can I take 2 classes in one period? The boy at the master's desk was still crying. At the back of the class, some boys were laughing loudly. The rest of the boys were standing near the member of the staff in the kind of crowd that gathered at a crossroad when there has been an accident. In a sharp tone, the principal said, don't start quoting the rules to me. Ever since you have started hanging around with Khanna, every job seems a problem for you. Malaviya gazed at the principal side. The clerk said, look at it at the government bus wala do, Malaviya. If a bus breaks down, all the passengers are accommodated in the bus behind. Accommodate these boys in your class in the same way. Malaviya said sweetly with a shades of sarcasm. But this is the 9th year. I am teaching the 7th year over there. The principal side turned his head. Understanding people understood that now his hands would be thrust into the pockets of his shorts and he would scream. So it happened. I understand it all. You two have begun arguing like Khanna. I know the difference between the 7th and 9th year. Don't dare try teaching me my job, bhaiya. Just carry out orders. Chuppe, with no argument. Those follow me. The principal sahib was from a village nearby. He was renowned far and wide for 2 qualities. First, for extracting the maximum amount of government money for the college by being imaginative with the accounts. Secondly, for using the local Awadhi dialects when he was extremely angry. When he falsified the account, not even the great auditor could find fault with them. When he began to speak Awadhi, not even the greatest sophist could answer his argument. Malaviya returned with a bow down, landing his baton on the back of the boy in the torn pajama. The principal said, go, everyone go and sit quietly in the classroom. If you so much as draw breathe, I will fly the hide off you. As the boys left, the clerk smiled and said, "Let go and take a look at Khanna Master too." Khanna Master's real name was Khanna. Khanna is not the name of the caste, just a Gandhi, Nehru are not the name of the caste, but the name of the individual. This is a simple way to rid the country of the caste system. If you take the caste name away from a man and convert it into a surname, then nothing remains of caste. It destroys itself. Khanna Master was a history teacher, but at his time he was teaching an intermediate class English. He was grinding his teeth and saying, "You can write great long love stories in Hindi, but when you have to answer in English, you hang your head like a horse." A boy was standing up in the class, hanging his head, although due to shortage of nourishing food and lack of games and reaction, every average student looked like a half-starved horse. This boy's face was so constructed that with him the name stuck. His classmates laughed loudly. Khanna Master asked in English, "Tell me, what does metaphor mean?" The boy stood unmoved. Some time ago, there was a great hue and cry in India that an intelligent man is like a beast with no horn or tail. In that tumult, the children of many illiterate men and women left their plough and hoes in the fields and launched attack on the school. These boys arrived in the thousands lying siege to school, college and universities. There was turmoil in the field of education. Now you couldn't find anywhere spreading the word that an illiterate man is a beast. In fact, on the quiet, people had begun to say that only those fit for higher education should take it up, and then where should be screening process. Having gone full circle in this way, the opinion was being expressed that village boys should again be made a grass the handle of the plough and be left in field. But even after failing their natural exam year after year, enduring all kind of reprimands and rebukes, and listening to politicians outpouring on the greatness of agriculture, those boys were not prepared to return to the world of the plough and the hoe. They stuck to the schools like leeches and were determined to stay stuck to them at any cost. The boy with the horse-like countenance was one of this crowd. In the roundabout way, he was told every day, "Go on, go and milk your buffalo and twist your bullock's tails. Shally and Keats are not for you." But the son had already advanced several centuries ahead of his father and was not prepared to take these hints. Even today, his father would cut fodder for his bullocks with a blade used commonly in the 12th century. At the same time, his son would hide his horse face in a book with the dust-colored cover and concentrate on the colorful nightfall of 20th century Calcutta. He wasn't prepared to suffer any alteration to the state of affair, and so he couldn't explain the meaning of metaphor and didn't want to argue over the constructions of his face. Like every average student, this boy was informal in his attire. At that time, he was barefoot, standing clad in dirty pajamas made of stripped materials which town people generally used to sleep in. He was wearing a thick kechu-colored shirt and broken buttons. His head was covered with stiff, dry hair. His face was unwashed and his eyes had a stupid look about them. As soon as you saw him, it was obvious that he had bolted the college, ensured by the propaganda like a beast with no horn or tail. Last year, the boy had copied out a love story from same cheap periodicals and had it published in the school magazine under his own name. Khanna Master was besmirching the names he would earn by this exploit. Changing his tone of voice, he said, "Respected author, won't you tell us something of what a metaphor is?" The boy began scratching his thighs. After twisting his mouth to a few times, he finally said in Hindi, "Just the metaphor of pain appeared in Hindi poetry of Mahadevi." The Khanna Master said sharply, "Shut up. This is an English class." The boy stopped scratching his thighs. The master was wearing khaki trousers and blue bush shirt and just a look smart dark glasses. He got up out of his chair and moved round in front of his desk. He leaned a small portion of his rump against it. He was about to say something more to the boy when he noticed the principal staring at him from the door at the back of the class. He also had a view of entire shoulders of the clerk was standing outside on veranda. Removing his rump from the desk, he stood up straight and said, "Sir, I was teaching a poem by Shelley." The principal replied quickly, one word crumbling after another. "But who was listening to you? These boys are looking at pictures." He came into the room and poked his cane into the backs of two boys, one after another. They stood up. One was a greasy boy wearing a dirty bush shirt and pajamas, his hat dripping with oil. The second had a shaved head, wore a shirt and pants, and was a wrestler type. The principal had asked, "What were you being taught?" He bent down and picked up a magazine from the first boy's chair. This was the literature of the cinema. He opened it, held it up, and waved it about. The breast of a white woman, flapped before the boy's eyes. The principal threw the magazine to the ground and screamed in Avadi, "Is this what thou art teaching them?" The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Seeing his chance, the lover of Mahadevi poetry quietly slipped back to his seat, standing at one end of the classroom. The principal sahib issued a challenge to Khanna master at the other hand. "This is the level of discipline in your class. The boys are reading film magazines, and on the strength of these boys, you are getting pressure put on me to make you the vice principal. Is this the way you will conduct yourself as a vice principal, Bhaiya? If the goes on like this, then can't forget the vice principal. Next year I will damn well see thee out on the street with no job." As he spoke, the spirit of the great Avadi poet Goswami Tulsidas slipped through his voice. He returned to the common speech. "What is there in education? The important thing is discipline. Understand, Master Sahib." What this principal Sahib departed like the hero of Omar Khayyam, who came like the water and left like the wind. Behind his back, he heard Khanna master muttering indignantly. The principal and the clerk walked through the college gate. On the side of the road, a man had gathered together a handful of laborers and was losing his temper with them. The principal went and stood by him. For a few minutes he tried to understand why the man was losing his temper. The laborers were pleading with him. The principal understood that there was nothing special in it. The laborers and the contractors were just making a display of their daily habit of discussion, and the conversation had reached a stalemate. The principal went forward and said, "Go, lads, go and do your work. If you cheat the contractor sahib, you will get a shoe beating." The laborers looked gratefully at the principal sahib. His comments gave them the chance to end the discussion and go back to the work. The contractor said to the principal affectionately, "They are all thieves. If you so much as shut your eyes for a moment, they will steal the wax from your eyes. They demand 1.5 times the going rate and moan if anyone mentioned work." The principal sahib said, "It's the same everywhere. Just look at me. No matter he has inclination to teach, I'm constantly at the back, and so I manage." The constructor burst out laughing. He said, "What are you telling me? I do the same. I know everything that goes on." Pausing, he said, "Where you are off to?" The clerk answered, "To Vedaji, because the check have to be signed. Get them, sign them." He mentioned the principal to move on. When the principal made to leave, the contractor asked, "And how are you otherwise?" The principal stopped. "I'm fine. The same old problem with the Khanna and his friends. He roams around spreading propaganda against people like you and me." The contractor spoke forcefully. "Don't you worry. You can behave like a king in your college. Tell them that the answer to the propaganda is the stick. Tell them this is Shopalganj. They should watch their step." The principal and the clerk walked on. After a while, the clerk said, "Make the contractor sahib a member of the college committee too. He will be useful." The principal sahib was thinking. The clerk continued, "We'll make him a patron and write out a receipt for a donation dated by 4 years. He should also be on the managing committee. Then everything will be all right." The principal sahib gave no immediate answer. Hesitatingly, he said, "We'll speak to Vedaji. These are matters of high politics. Does it matter what we say?" A man on a bicycle appeared, mentioning him to stop and get down. The principal sahib said, "There is a smallpox epidemic in Nandapur, and you are You are standing there with your bag under your arm, composing fancy verses. The man joined his hands in greeting and asked, "Since when? I have no information." Frowning, the principal said, "If you could tear yourself away from the town occasionally, then you would get information. Get over there quietly and start vaccinating. If you don't, there will be a complaint against you. You will be out on your ear, and that will be the end of your Terry Lynn." Streaming out pleas for forgive, and the man went on his way. The principal's wife said to the clerk, "He is the public health ADO here. Imagine whoever get an officer tag on his tail begin to think he's a Plato. This one too, God knows who is he thinks he is. He goes by on the road and doesn't even recognize you. I thought to myself, I would better teach the boy a lesson. I know he's just another fool," said the clerk. Chapter 4. Heaps of rubbish shops, worse than rubbish heaps. The tehsil officer, the police station, the toddy house, the block development officer, the liquor shop, the college. If you went along the street, you would see all this. Some way ahead there was also a mud hut built in a dense mango grove with its back to the road. Its doorway, which had no door, faced the jungle. In the monsoon, farm laborers retreated from the shades of the tree and held their gambling session in the hut. Otherwise, it was empty. Even when it was empty, people wouldn't let it stay empty. When they had a chance, man and woman would put in their favorite use. The name that Shopalganj had given the building would have been even shocked Henry Miller. Watering it down a bit, one college teacher had dubbed it to the Love House. The stretch of road between the heap of rubbish and the Love House can run along the entire edge of Shopalganj. Shopalganj proper was in the other direction. Away from the road, Shopalganj proper was in the Vediji sitting room. To reach the sitting room, you had to pass through an alley. On the both sides, there was haphazardly built thatched house. The raised platform outside them had been extended over the year and now took up most of alley. They epitomize an philosophy of encroachment. When you find empty land on your borders, grab a few feet of it when no one looking. Suddenly, the alley opened out to an open square. 3 or 4 neem trees were growing there that they had planted before government invented a forestation festival. They had escaped being touched by any leader of the officer, and they had been excused the ritual of transplantation and camera clicking. In this green and pleasant place, the house had so encroached upon a whole side of square that it was difficult to get past. The house was Vediji's. Its front portion was of brick and quite impressive by rural standards. At the back, the walls were mud, and there was a suspicion that behind them were a heap of rubbish. The sort of symbolic modernization exemplified by India's gleaming airport and glittering 5-star hotel, and even had an effect on the architecture of this house, which only goes to prove that from Delhi to Shopalganj, the Indian creative genius is more or less the same. The front half of the house, which include a raised platform outside the door, a veranda, and one large room, was graced by the name, the sitting room. But even common constructions workers knew that the sitting room was not just mortar. 10 Downing Streets, the White House, the Kremlin, and so forth are not the name just for building, but the power. Returning from the police station, Rupan Babu saw a crowd in the hall of public audience, that is the veranda. His step quickened, and his dhoti began to flap. As soon as he climbed to the veranda, he found that his cousin Ranganath had come from the town on a truck. On the way, had been fleeced of 2 rupees. A skinny man sat in the room wearing a dirty vest and stripped underwent. It was November and rather cold in the evening, but he was looking quite comfortable in his vest. His name was Mangal or Tuesday, an auspicious day, but people call him Shanichar or Saturday, which comes under Saturn and is the most ill-fated day of the week. His hair had begun to turn grey and his front teeth had fallen out. His job to keep sitting in Vediji's sitting room. He generally just wore underpants. Today, seeing him in a vest, Rupan Babu understood that Shanichar wanted to appear formal. In one breath, Shanichar told Rupan Babu of Ranganath's difficulties and beating out a complicated rhythm on his naked thigh. He said longingly, "If Brother Badri had been there, we would have seen some fun." As soon as he finished greeting Ranganath, Rupan Babu said, "You did the right thing, Ranganath brother. You cleared up the argument with 2 rupees. It's not right to shed blood over these small matters." Ranganath had not met Rupan Babu for 2 years. Granting that Rupan's gravity was the most interesting feature of the day, Ranganath said, "I was ready to give him a thrashing, but then I thought about it and held back." Rupan Babu raised his hand in his capacity as an expert on the thrashing, that you didn't just the right thing. The student community gets a bad name through such incidents. Ranganath now looked at him closely. At the end of this dhoti and shoulders, his mouth red with fresh betel leaf, several liters of oil in his hair. By any standard of local thuggery, he looked like a lad. Ranganath attempted to change the subject. He asked, "Where is Badri, brother? I haven't seen him." Shanichar began to brush his pants as if it get rid of time. He knitted his brows and said, "I too am missing Badri, brother. If he would have been here, then by now." "Where is Badri, brother?" Ranganath asked, paying no attention to Shanichar and addressing Rupan. Rupan Babu replied unconcernedly, "Let Shanichar tell you, he didn't ask any permission to go. He has gone somewhere. He must have gone out of the village. He will come back tomorrow. The next day, the day after, he will come back." From his words, it was difficult to tell that Badri was Rupan Babu's real brother and lived with him in the same house. Ranganath drew a deep breath. Shanichar sat on the floor, stretched his leg and scratches his groin. As he did so, his eyes closed and glow of pleasure and contentment spread over his face. Gradually, as he rubbed the skin, his mouth opened wide like a wolf and he yawned. Then in a drowsy voice he said, "Ranganath can say nothing to him, but if anyone had tried to take a paisa, let alone 2 rupees from your Ganjha village, he would know it." The word Ganjha was not new to Ranganath. This was the technical word which the residents of Shivpalganj used for themselves as a little title of respect. On occasions, many apostles of peace in the surrounding village would also say, "Don't you bend words with him. You don't know it, but the bastards at Ganjha." Ranganath asked, "What class are you in now, Rupan?" It appeared from Rupan's expression that he didn't like this question. He said, "I am in the 10th year. You will say that I was there for 2 years ago too, but I can't think of any way of getting out of this class in Shivpalganj. You don't know, brother, this country's education system is absolutely useless. Even important leaders say that. I am of the same opinion." "Then you don't know the condition of the college. It is a den of lotus of liabouts. The masters have given up teaching and just play politics. They plague father day and night. Do this, do that, increase our salary, message over neck. Has anyone any chance passing an exam here? Some do. There are some shameless boys who sometimes manage to pass an exam, but because of that, inside the room, Vediji was giving medicine to patients. Suddenly he spoke. "Be still, Rupan." The end of this maladministration at his hand. It seems as if a voice had spoken from the heaven. In such a voice had Lord Krishna's victory over the evil king Kans been prophesied. Rupan Babu was silent. Ranganath turned towards the room and asked him in a loud voice, "Uncle, what's your connection with the college?" "Connection? Vediji powerful laughs resounded throughout the room. You want to know my relation with the college? Rupan satisfied Ranganath's curiosity. In a very business-like fashion, Rupan said, Father is the college manager. The appointment of the master is in his hand. Reading the effect of his words, Ranganath faced then he said, You won't find a manager like him in the whole country. For the straight, he is perfectly straight, and for the bastard, he is a dyed in the whole wool bastard. Ranganath digested this information in silence and just for the sake of saying something. And now is there? And how is the cooperative union going? Uncle was something to do with that too. No, not was, as Rupan said rather sharply. He was, is, and will remain the managing director. Vediji was, is, and will remain. During the British Raj, Vediji was, is, and will remain. During the British Raj, he had revered the British. In the days of Indian government, he had begun to revere Indian rulers. He was the older servant of the nation in the last world. When there was danger from Japan, he had enlisted many soldiers to fight the Far East. Now, when he need, he would enlist hundreds of members in his political faction overnight. From the first, he had the people as a jury member and successor to a judge court, as a custodian of the disputed property in civil case and chief among them. Now he was the managing director of the cooperative union and the college manager. In reality, he didn't want to hold these posts because he had no greed for power, but there was no one else who could carry out such a responsible job in the locality. And however many young men there were, like all other young men in the country, they were all useless. So in his old age, he was forced to take up these positions. Old age, only Anno Domini, requires that these words be used for Vediji. If you wanted to be precise, you could say that he was 62, but like those hundreds of the great men who lived in the capital to serve the country, Vediji was not old despite his age, and like those same great men, he had vowed that he would grow old only when he died. Until people could convince him that he was dead, he would consider himself alive and carry on serving the nation. Like every great Indian politician, he loathed politics and made jokes and at the expense of politicians. Like Gandhiji, he took no post in his political party because he wanted to encourage new blood. But in the matter of cooperative and college, his hands has been forced and he had agreed to be enforced. One of the Vediji's profession was Ayurveda, a traditional Indian medicine. In his practice of Ayurvedic medicine, he had two special formula: free treatment of the poor and money back if not satisfied. Leaving aside whatever relief these formula brought to other people, they didn't leave Vediji lacking any comfort. He had divided disease into two classes, open and secret. He treated open disease only and secret disease in secret. One of his theories was that all diseases are caused by the loss of chastity. Looking at the Looking at the lackluster, half-dead faces of the college boys, he would generally refer to this theory. If any person opined that the boys' health was being ruined by poverty and the absence of good diet, Vediji would turn this argument around and such that the person was denying the importance of chastity, and since anyone who denied the importance of chastity was immoral, the person talking of poverty and poor food was immoral too. He gave long and terrifying speech on the consequences of the loss of chastity. Socrates perhaps told him personally or someone else that if after doing it 3 times you are going to despoil your virtue a 4th time, then you should dig your own grave first. He used to describe this conversation so graphically that it seemed that Socrates was still his honorary advisor on chastity. In Vediji's opinion, the great harm caused by the loss of chastity was that after losing it, even if he had wanted to lose it, a man no longer remained fit to lose it again. brief, it was his view that in order to remain fit to lose one's chastity, one shouldn't lose one's chastity. Hearing his speech, three-quarters of the college boys despaired of life, but they did not commit mass suicide because one of Vediji's clinic's advertisement says, "A message of a hope for young men despairing of life." If hope had been the name of some girl, the boy would haven't read the advertisement more eagerly, but they knew that the message referred to the tablet which looked like a pallet of goat shit and which, as soon as it reached the stomach, sent electricity coursing through their veins. One day, Vadiji lectured Ranganath on the benefits of chastity. He described a rather strange philology from which he calculated that you have to consume several tons of food to produce a few ounces of essence. Essence is converted into blood, blood into something else, and then this way finally one drop of semen is created. He proves that it doesn't cost as much to build an atom bomb as it does to produce one semen. Ranganath realized that if there was anything valuable in India, it was semen. Vadiji told him that semen had 1,000 enemies and all of them were intent on looting it. If anyone contrived to preserve his semen, then rest assured his whole character was saved. From all this seems that previously there had been great emphasis on semen conservation. On one side of flowed river of milk and honesty, on the other rivers of semen. Finally, Vadiji recited a Sanskrit words which mean that a man died if he spilled one drop of semen, and if he could raise one drop, then life was his. As soon as he heard the sound of Sanskrit, Shanichar joined his hands and said, "Praise to be God." He lay his head on the ground and, in a paroxysm of faith, lifted his backside towards the ceiling. Vediji, becoming more excited, and asked Rangnath, "How can I describe you the glow of chastity? After some days, regard your face in mirror, then you will know." Rangnath stood up to go indoors. He was already acquainted with this side of uncle's nature. Rupan Babu was standing near the door. Vediji's speech had no effect on him. He whispered to the Ranganath, "Why did you need chastity to bring a glow on your face? Nowadays you can get it just as well as from cream and powder."